So I'd first of all like to say hello to everybody who's joining us today and welcome. We will wait for maybe another 2 minutes for others to join. I can see people are joining in. So we'll wait for another 2 minutes and give people some time to join us. In the meantime, I would like to invite you to introduce yourselves in the chat. Tell us where you're from, your name, and perhaps your affiliation, if any. So as we wait for another 2 minutes, please feel free to introduce yourselves. Thank you. Hi, everyone, once again. I think I will go ahead and begin. We're 8 minutes past the hour. So I will go ahead and begin. And on behalf of the entire Outright team, I would like to welcome you all. And thank you so much for joining us for today's discussion, where we'll be interrogating the increased targeting of LGBTIQ individuals in Africa. So I am Yvonne Huamari, and I'm the Africa Program Officer for Outright, and I will be moderating today's discussion. I am being assisted by my colleague Meg, who is going to be with us today. Before we get started, I would like to walk us through some housekeeping and logistics. So first of all, the session is going to be 60 minutes long. So we're going to have 35 minutes of a panel discussion and a 20-minute Q&A session after the discussion. All questions should be posted in the chat or in the Q&A function. So please feel free to pose your questions at any point during the discussions. Then we will consolidate all these and then put them to the panelists during the Q&A session. Just to add on, I'd like to encourage you all again to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know who you are, your organization affiliation, if any, and where you're joining us from. This session is going to be recorded, but only the speakers and the moderators who are sharing their audio and visuals will be visible. So if you're concerned about your privacy, you won't be on the screen at any point or at any time during this webinar. So I'll just get right into it. I'm sure we've all heard or read about the targeting of LGBTIQ individuals and or organizations in Africa in the recent past. Specifically, the ones we've heard about the most has been Uganda, South Africa, and Ghana. And today's discussions will really focus on interrogating, first of all, the restrictive trends within these countries, if any, and this will be primarily in an effort to understand what is the prevailing environment in which LGBTIQ individuals have to live and LGBTIQ organizations have to function. So the recent challenges, what are these challenges? For those who haven't heard, then today we will actually get to hear from representatives of movements on the ground on what is going on within their countries and what are the drivers or who are the drivers of these homophobic acts within these jurisdictions. I am aware that the movements within these countries have been pushing back to ensure the protection of the LGBTIQ community. And this is something I would like us to discuss a little bit more. So the panelists, again, today we're going to offer us more insight into what the movement is doing to challenge these limitations and these violations, and what more can be done, and by who, to secure the human rights of LGBTIQ individuals in Africa, of course, and specifically within the countries of from which we're going to be getting their perspectives, and that is South Africa, Ghana, and Uganda. So today we have an amazing panel with us today. We have Wisdom Kwame Bebli from Ghana, and he is a human rights advocate, social and development worker. He doubles as the executive director for Solace Initiative and the executive secretary for the Alliance for Equality and Diversity, which is a national coalition of LGBTIQ plus NGOs and professional individuals working for the promotion and protection of human rights of sexual minorities. We then have Roche Kester from South Africa, who is a poet and an activist. She has joined out as the hate crimes manager for the Love Not Hate advocacy program, and that was in 2019. And she was a co-host for an award-winning weekly community LGBTIQA radio show on Bush Radio called The Salon, based in Cape Town. And she also formed part of the organizing team that launched the first queer feminist film festival in 2018. Next, we have Frank Mugisha from Uganda, who is a prominent advocate for the rights of LGBTIQ persons, a respected champion of human rights, and an anti-violence advocate. He founded Icebreakers Uganda, an organization created as a support network for LGBTIQ Ugandans who were out or in the process of coming out. He is also the executive director of Sexual Minorities Uganda, SMUG, the largest and leading organization of lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and intersex movement in Uganda. Welcome to all the panelists for today. And I will jump right into it with the first question. So there have been numerous reports on mainstream and social media, and of course on various listservs and the communications to various partners and allies, highlighting the targeting of LGBTIQ individuals and organizations in your countries, Ghana, Uganda, and South Africa. Now, can you give us some more insight into the situation within these countries, as well as what is driving this targeting and how does it impact on LGBTIQ lives? So I will start with Frank. You can go first. Just feel free to unmute and then proceed.
Well, thank you so much, and good afternoon or good evening, everyone from Uganda. It's about 4 p.m. here, and we are in a total lockdown. So that in itself is a great impact on the LGBT community. But today I'll share some of the background on what is causing a lot of homophobia and transphobia in Uganda. Uganda has been well known by many of our partners around the world for being extremely anti-gay. And that because Uganda came on the world scene in 2009 when they introduced the anti-gay bill, which was called the Kill the Gays Bill. So the background mostly around homophobia has been around the legislations. Uganda is also one of the countries that still has those draconian laws that were left behind by the British in our Penal Code Act, whereby same-sex acts are criminalized. So many times, politicians, religious leaders, including law enforcers, they use this very old law, but also the fact that there are always laws coming up to continuously prosecute and persecute LGBT persons. So point number one is around legislation. And also most recently, we saw that Uganda again recriminalized same gender acts in one of a legislation that was passed by Parliament called the Sexual Offences Bill. There's a clause there that is very critical, that criminalizes same gender acts, but also explicitly criminalizes anal sex. So these legislations have fueled a lot of homophobia and transphobia because this is what the law enforcers use when they're trying to clamp down and witch hunt the LGBT community. So the laws itself. And then when you come to another issue is the issue of religion. Uganda is a very religious country. And as sexual minorities in Uganda, the LGBT movement, we've investigated too much into the work of religious leaders here in Uganda. And we've seen that most of the homophobia and transphobia is actually fueled by Western religious leaders, including one of the religious leaders, Scott Lively, who we have sued in the United States. So the background, how religious leaders have supported even the drafting of some of these legislations. And of course, here religion and faith is a very big thing. When a religious leader speaks, Ugandans listen so much. So anything indoctrinated in religion will sell to society. And then another point is around culture, whereby many Ugandans now believe that being LGBT is Western. So anything around LGBT is Western. And now there's even a new notion. When they talk about human rights, many Ugandans will assume you're definitely going to talk about LGBT rights. So that's the issue, that now human rights and LGBT rights are Western. So there's no space for dialogue and changing hearts and minds of people because it is seen as Western. And then finally, I'll talk about the media, because we've seen a lot of negative media coming in from Uganda, including the outing and exposing people who are known or perceived to be LGBT. And some of them have been these very extreme, bizarre headlines. Like, for instance, when we had one time, one of the newspapers saying, kill them, they are out after our children. So such kind of media has also fueled and increased homophobia and transphobia in the country. And then my final point around how it is fueling homophobia, given the limited time I'm giving a brief, is around the political scapegoating of the LGBT community. For instance, we just moved out of elections. And during the election time, both parties, ruling party, opposition, they scapegoated the LGBT community. And also we've seen that many times when an anti-gay legislation comes up, politicians are trying to cover up something. Whenever they ask the question, what have you done? What have you achieved? They always bring into issues of homosexuality. So the scapegoating of the LGBT community and always placing us in the middle of this political fighting and in games has also fueled homophobia and transphobia, but also the hate statements that come out of politicians, especially like during the elections. This caused a lot. So the impact, one of the impact we've seen has been definitely around the pandemic, COVID-19, and the laws around COVID-19, where we saw that at the beginning of the pandemic, some of our colleagues were arrested from a shelter. And also most recently, we had another shelter raided by the police and colleagues arrested and charged under the COVID laws. And also what I was talking about before, the impact of on the LGBT community, where using these, again, using the laws, where I've seen blackmail and extortion by law enforcers. Then also the issue of trauma on the LGBT community and mental health. And also the fear. Many LGBT persons are living in fear, and we've seen many people go back into the closet because they are worried of being outed in the media, because they know what is at stake if they get outed. They are worried of getting arrested because they see the arrests happening. Then, of course, the derogatory treatment given by the LGBT community when they are arrested, the annual examinations, parading the LGBT community before the media, it impacts on the movement building here and also the visibility of the LGBT community. So I think for now, I'll stop there. Thank you so much. And again, good evening, everyone. All thanks to Outright for making me part of this. And thank you, Yvonne, for the great introduction. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Frank. I'll just move on to wisdom, and then Roche, you can come right after wisdom with your contribution. So wisdom, just go ahead and unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Hello, everyone, and nice to see you all on the call to deliberate and follow us on this discussion that is ongoing in Africa, most especially Uganda, South Africa, and in Ghana. So for Ghana, is not different from what our brother Frank has just shared with us. But for Ghana, over the years, abuses of LGBTIQ people has gone unreported. And this has caused a lot of stir among even the movements that we have within the LGBTIQ community. And this time around, the visibility of or the actions of LGBTIQ organizations and individuals that are creating awareness on this unreported cases of abuses that is going on in the country has caused a stir within the political arena, has caused a stir within the religious leaders, and then our culture, traditional leaders, which is causing them to speak about the LGBTIQ issues within the country. And it is causing a lot of debates within the political political system, and also causing a lot of discussion around within the religious system. For us in Ghana, the religious leaders are the ones who put pressure on the political leaders to speak. And that is where you see the political leaders also use those as leverages to speak about the hate or stir hate within the LGBTIQ movement, or LGBTIQ advocacy within Ghana. And not too long ago, there was a raid in one of the safe spaces of the LGBTIQ offices that were open. And it caused a lot of debate. And it is the first time that LGBTIQ in Ghana and Ghana as a whole has a very holistic debate or discussions around LGBTIQ discussions. And it was really a heated debate, which took us for over a month as we speak. And it really caused a lot of impact on the LGBTIQ community, as well as the whole impact on the individuals as well. So for most of the impacts that came up, it has positive and negative impacts within the community. One, the positive impact is, visibility for us, for the LGBTIQ community. People were able to, individuals, organizations were able to stand up for themselves and were able to speak against the homophobic speeches that were coming from some of our religious leaders, our political leaders. And a lot also has gone on social media, that which is on the mainstream. People are just talking. You find LGBTIQ individuals also openly, with their names and with their names on social media, attacking and addressing some of the issues that people are attacked, that are coming from this anti-gay people who always want to speak ill about the community. The religious leaders are also speaking, and it's causing a lot of fear and panic among the LGBTIQ community, which is causing a lot of attack also more of attack on LGBTIQ people in the community. So the negative aspect is stigma and discrimination within the LGBTIQ community, and also LGBTI individuals who are at their workplaces are facing a lot of stigma and discrimination. Those who are with families also, those who have to leave home, those who have to deal with all this stigma and issues that are being stirred up or speak about in the media, which is causing a lot of panic within their house, within the LGBTIQ individuals. People are not able to go to work. People are not able to open up and speak up for themselves. Some people who are closeted are finding it difficult, and this is draining their mental health. It's draining their productivity wherever they found themselves. And so this is really some of the impacts that is negative and positive impact that this is making on the LGBTIQ community in Ghana. And the religious leaders and the culture, the environment that we live in is not really giving a lot of space for LGBTIQ individuals to openly speak. But behind the scenes, people are learning, relearning, and in those spaces are able to advocate. Some are able to advocate, the curious mind are able to advocate for the rights of LGBTIQ wherever they find themselves within the spaces. But because of stigma and discrimination and because of tag, others will not want to openly speak about the situation, but we rather will do a bit of advocacy behind closed doors and behind the scenes to speak, to advocate for the rights of LGBTIQ people.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. Roche, you can feel free to unmute yourself. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Yvonne, and my fellow panelists. Thank you so much for inviting me to this platform. So, listening to both the accounts from Uganda and Ghana, I would say you would think that it would be better in South Africa, but unfortunately it is, to a certain degree it is, but not holistically. If I can give everybody just an overview of what's been happening in the country. As of February to date, we've had about 16 very public violent crimes and deaths of LGBTI individuals, and this has kind of sent a shock through the community in terms of safety. People are weary about going out. They are weary about, executing the human rights. And it is a delicate situation at the moment where we are just looking for means of protection and safety for LGBTI individuals. So just to give you a bit of context as to why everybody knows that we have one of the more progressive constitutions in the whole world, and our laws are quite inclusive and they deliberate in what they say in terms of protection. Under Section 9.3 of our Constitution, it says people may not discriminate against on the basis of sex, sexual orientation, or gender identity.
Oh, so we seem to have lost Roche, and I hope that she'll be able to rejoin us and continue with her presentation. But oh, I see she's trying to join us again. But in the meantime, I think what we have heard is pretty similar and cross-cutting in Ghana and in Uganda. So it would be interesting to hear more about what the situation is like in South Africa. Maybe once Roche is able to join us again, then we'll be able to hear that. Roche, can you hear us? Okay. I think perhaps she's still trying to connect. But I find it very interesting, both Wisdom and Frank, that you both make reference to religion, to culture, and also to hate speech that is really driving societal or instigating society to then be move and carry out homophobic attacks, and not just attacks, but also the verbal and the verbal attacks on LGBTIQ individuals. And this is, of course, driven by the negative rhetoric by the religious leaders and the political leaders, which in Africa, I think we tend to hold in high regard to some extent. Um, but also, another thing that I also heard that is cross-cutting is media, and how media has played both a negative and a positive role in what is going on in the two countries. For Uganda, you've said it's because of like the mainstream media that has been really propagating the hate speech and the negative rhetoric that is being spewed against the LGBTIQ community, and therefore influencing society to act in a homophobic manner. So making it harder for us to be able to change hearts and minds of individuals. But Wisdom, you also mentioned how people have now are using social media, and how social media is empowering the LGBTIQ community to challenge to challenge the restrictions and to challenge the homophobia that is being meted against the community. So thank you so much, and for those submissions. As we wait for maybe Roche to join us, we can move on to respond to maybe the next question. So in light of all this that we have shared, Wisdom and Frank, what is the local community, what is the local movement doing? Not just a local movement, perhaps in partnership with allies. What are they doing to challenge the situation that is currently ongoing? And where are the gaps? What more needs to be done, and by who? So maybe Wisdom, you can go first. Just unmute yourself, and then you can proceed.
Okay, thank you very much. For what has been done or what is being done locally, for us as a movement in Ghana, I would say that it is the time for us to organize, and that is what we are currently doing, organizing ourselves to have a stronger movement, to be able to address these issues one after the other as and when it's coming up. And it is very interesting to know also that we are gaining a lot of support from other human rights institutions, other allies, for instance, some key stakeholders from the various human rights institutions and health intervention NGOs who are also in country working around key populations are giving us a lot of support in terms of addressing such issues when it comes out. For instance, the recent one of the 21, we are told to say 27 because there were 27 in the conference room, and the 6 has to speed off because for their lives because the police raided the conference room. And so the 21 are the ones that has brought us together again after the first incident of the heated debate around the opening of the office of the LGBT plus right Ghana. And this has caused a lot of stir. And now this also, the interesting thing is that within the media space, the first one the media gave a lot of attention, and there was a lot of information regarding LGBTIQ out there. But interesting enough, this second one did not make that noise, or there wasn't a lot of projection on this. It was just between the local who were in that region who were trying to give an overview about the situation. But the international community really picked up on the story on the 21 and made sure that the people in the world know exactly what is going on in Ghana. Back to the allyship, we had some institutions, for instance, like the CDD Ghana, issuing out a statement regarding the the 21. We also had Commission on Human Rights and Administrative Justice stepping in to speak against what is meted on people. We had the local missions in country who were very supportive, showing us solidarity in how to address or how they can support us. The international community as well. We had Outright Action International following up. We had the UN Human Rights Office also following up, issuing a statement. We had the AU the Special Rapporteurs for the African Union also, issuing out a release recently. There's been a lot of engagement and support right from the community as well as the international community who has supported us in terms of addressing the gaps, these gaps. And there has been also like continuous discussions as we speak. There are a lot of continuous discussions within the spaces that we are also addressing how to address the 21 issues that are currently ongoing. And fortunately for us, because we are organizing, we have the strength of Pan-African ILGA who is coming in to help us coordinate affairs in this crisis. So we just recently formed a working group that is going to be manned to coordinate the affairs, the crisis, what is supposed to be done, what direction, the approach we are supposed to use. And so this just came in at the right time to help us coordinate, because within the movement, in as much as we are together in the movement, not all of the organizations or the individual organizations belong to a coalition. And so they're coming together as a network of NGOs to come together and also listen to a working group that will coordinate the affairs, will help us achieve what we want to achieve in terms of addressing such issues when they come up. Some of the gaps that, some of what have been done also is because these issues have been arising, we are looking to we have started to develop like a national strategy that will look at addressing these issues. For instance, we had a meeting to start that discussion, and we are going to develop a document that will come up with this strategies. For instance, in these strategies, we are going to look at like safety and security of the LGBTIQ people in Ghana, and also how to address issues when they come up, and also how to address the safety and security of activists and advocates who are also working for the LGBTIQ community. We are also looking at access to legal justice and reform. How are we going to, which strategy are we going to use in terms of legal framework to address these issues? Also, we are looking at communication and media awareness, advocacy or awareness. How are we going to tackle media to express the advocacy around LGBTIQ issues, to have people listen in, not to buy in, but listen in and have a listening ear towards the issues of LGBTIQ people in the country. And so this and many, we have like also a legal, we have also some of the gap also is like legal representation of lawyers that will represent us when there are LGBTIQ issues. One of the challenges that we realize within the 21 is legal representative who are within the community to help us address this issue when it come up. If not, we have to go and look for lawyers that we have to take them through orientation, tell them how the community is, what they need to do for us, how they need to speak for us, which is also some of the gaps that we have at the moment. And this and many more that is coming up. And I'm sure that as we move ahead in terms of how to address these issues when they come up, we will see the way forward and how the future looks like in terms of addressing these issues. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wisdom. Frank, please feel free to unmute and then you can proceed.
Well, thank you so much, Wisdom. It is actually very good to hear about some of the strategies which are not very far away from our own strategies here in Uganda. But I'll first talk about the measures that the movement is taking here. Well, first of all, for Uganda, I think it has been around creating visibility and also supporting communities to work locally on changing hearts and minds, because we feel that that is really important. So in terms of movement building, And then also for the media, creating our own media platforms by using so much social media. But that's not only for, you know, creating awareness about what is happening in Uganda and putting out positive messages, but also for our own security. For instance, you've seen a lot of hashtags when people have been arrested here that, you know, have created some protection and safety for individuals in trouble. And then also working in coalitions. This has been very important, especially working with our partners and allies internationally, because then we have one clear voice coming from one centered coalition that is saying, well, look, if something has happened in Uganda, this is how you should respond. But also for Ugandans not to say this is only Western, it's only the Western partners pushing back, but to see that there is a local movement of coalitions working on pushing back on whatever is happening. So for us, working in coalition has been one of the measure we've used, and we've seen it really working. And then again, working with international partners and giving the direction on how to work with us. That has also been one way. And then, of course, our diplomatic allies, especially here in country, to help with the proactive behind the scene lobbying, which has been, you know, very influential in getting the message direct into the ear of the person who we want to get that message. And then, of course, using the courts. For example, we had to remove the anti-gay law through the courts. And then one of the media, the Rolling Stone, also went to the courts. So we are slowly looking at the incremental process on how we can go to the courts, of not at the extent of Kenya, but at least in Uganda, we're also using the courts. And also, most recently, when we're thinking about getting arrested and being tried in court, so we are happy that majority of our legal partners are always on standby and ready to be in court to support the LGBT community. So some of the gaps are very many, but I'll briefly talk about a few. One, I think, is working with the donor community to identify the exact needs of the communities given the changing environment. So for instance, there's COVID-19 right now, the pandemic that no one was prepared for. What are the actual needs for the community at this moment? And then the issue again of movement building, because of the changing situation. So how is movement building, and how do we even start doing movement building with the pandemic? So looking at some of those issues. And then another, being very proactive. That is a strategy that we have seen, that when we're doing advocacy, being very proactive and not being only active, sometimes has worked. Again, you're working with partners to get the exact information in the ear of someone you want that message delivered to, but also creating a lot of political capital, because then if there's a lot of political capital, then there's security for the movement. And then also monitoring parliament, it is very important. And then identifying some champions within the country. Who are those champions that can, you know, speak out for the LGBT community, or again, we all speak with the LGBT community. And then strengthening regional networks, for example, Pan-African ILCA, that is doing great work right now in the region, but also the networks that are within our communities, like SMAG, the Gay and Lesbian Coalition in Kenya, strengthening them so that we are ready for the backlash that is always faced by the community. And then finally, I would say also reaching out and working directly with activists on the ground so that we can know what are the exact needs that we need for the community. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Frank. That is a lot of gaps that we still need to.
And I try to summarize.
Imagine that. So there's a lot that we still need to do, yeah? A lot that still needs to be done. So just a reminder to all who have joined us, please feel free to put your questions in the Q&A, use the Q&A function for your questions, or you can put your questions in the chat. But as we wait for your questions, I see Roche has joined us. Thank you so much for coming back. I hope your internet is cooperative now. So Roche, just please feel free to answer both questions. The first one being the situation in South Africa, What are the drivers of the impact that it has had on LGBTIQ lives in South Africa? What is the local movement doing? What are your allies doing? But also, what are the gaps that you have identified that still need to be filled? So, Roche, please feel free to go ahead.
Thank you. We have what we call load shedding here in South Africa. So electricity just goes off. It's a lot of fun in this country. So I was saying to everybody, listening to my colleagues, that you think that with all of our progressive laws that the situation may be a bit better in South Africa, but then I've also given the statistic as to what has been happening of late. And also that statistic is also largely not fully representative of what happens, because those are just the crimes that have been in the public arena that have gotten media attention. And so a lot of these crimes don't go reported because of things like secondary victimization by the police, or because of the nature of the crimes. We often know that lesbian and queer and bisexual women don't necessarily want their cases to be in the public arena because of the nature of the sexual violation or whatever violation may have occurred to them. So, I mean, the reasons around why these things still occur, I think it's kind of been a catch-up game for South Africa. As much as we have these legal processes in place and we have the constitution that states non-discrimination, and you may not violate human rights in terms of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or sex characteristics, how that translates in practicality is not always seen. And so what we have is a situation of equality versus equity. If these things really had to be inclusive, we would have had a more representative view of LGBTI persons in society. And this comes down to simple administrative things, I think, the inclusivity of forms, the fact that we need gender neutral bathrooms, the fact that things are very binary still in schools and in schooling systems when it comes to uniforms, sports, and bathrooms as well. And so I think the ask is definitely, how do you visualize LGBTI lives, that it doesn't just sit in a theoretical manner, but it translates practically. And so from a political point of view, I also think that as much as we engage a lot with our various governmental departments, and I am in various groups that work on issues pertaining to certain things, like we'll engage with the Department of Basic Education alongside in relation to guidelines on education, or Home Affairs in terms of civil unions and the same-sex marriages, for instance. And we are looking at things like, how do we register asylum seekers? What are the best processes? But these things do happen. However, political will is also a question in terms of visibility from government itself. When we celebrate any kind of LGBTI related date or event, there's hardly any visibility around these issues. We have only had the president speak out once during this time of 16 murders to say that he doesn't condone it, but there was no plan of action. There was no implemented strategy as to what it could mean to prevent these hate crimes in South Africa. So I think there's also, our society is also geared, and I think we've got similar issues to my colleagues where it comes to religion and then also culture. It's very patriarchal in society. Gender roles are consistently enforced in terms of what masculinity and femininities look like. There's hardly conversation around the spectrum of gender diversity in terms of expression, and then also in terms of what roles means. And I think this definitely contributes to prejudices against LGBTI individuals. It's trying to box individuals so that if they do not conform to these things, somehow they become a threat or seen as a threat to the greater societal narrative and therefore become targets. And I think there's a definite measure of the eradication of people who do not fall within that very rigid boxes of gender roles, to say men are supposed to be very masculine and women are supposed to be feminine. And then when we come to a legal measure of representation, I know we've had a lot of progress just beyond the Constitution to also fine-tune certain laws to make it more inclusive. And so when I speak, for instance, I mean, same-sex marriages were instituted in the country in 2006, but only 2 years ago did we manage to remove a clause from the Marriage Act that Home Affairs officials were able to, by means of conscientious objection, refrain from marrying same-sex couples. So those kinds of things that exist in our law. I'll give you an example. For instance, we have Act 49 that does make provision for legal gender recognition. However, people cannot self-identify in South Africa. If you want to change your sex descriptor or gender marker, you have to, for instance, be on hormone replacement therapy. And so this is in the medicalization of trans bodies, and it also ensures that I mean, in the structures itself, in the medical fraternity, there's not access for everybody to hormone replacement therapy. So we're constantly looking at reforming law and looking at what that means in implementation and not just theory. And I think that's the most pertinent problem in South Africa when it comes to translating equity and equality. And of course, some things in our constitution are also very contradictory. So as much as we have the protection for LGBTI rights, we also have, for instance, say, free speech. And so this gives leeway for religious groups or more conservative groups to then spew hatred en masse. And we have, for instance, one political party called the ACDP, and they've just been condemning LGBTI lives at every corner. They say derogatory and very harmful and unconstitutional things on public arenas, but how they are held to task with that then becomes an interesting battle, because on one hand of the law, we say we have freedom to religion, but on the other hand, we also say you are protected under our constitution in terms of your sexual orientation, gender identity, and sex characteristics. So it's been very interesting this month during Pride Month, how many government departments have come out and, with this pink washing, they want to then include us as a ticking box exercise. But then when this month is gone, the questions then arise again, what are you doing in terms of protections, in terms of visibility? And just so some of the things that I think that have happened and that we can call successes here in South Africa, there's definitely it takes a long time for laws to be reformed and tweaked. There's an entire parliamentary process that exists. And sometimes it can take up to 2 years. But we have had successes in terms of law reform and engaging with government departments. It's just also the question then of implementation and practicality and how that translates. But I think what needs to be done, especially in South Africa, is more education around such issues. So that means engaging people on various levels via our education system, engaging traditional leaders, engaging church leaders so that they can be allies to us, and we can get that buy-in from them to ensure that there's a measure of also educating their communities in terms of the diversity of LGBTI individuals. I think one of the things my organization has specifically also been trying to do is victim empowerment. So also being sure that community individuals are aware of the protections of their rights. And so to call out mechanisms of ill treatment and how they go about reporting these instances so that they are always protected. I think in terms of what my colleagues have said, we've also tried to do organizing in different means. Grassroots organizations take it upon themselves to bring visibility and create those dialogues in the community. But then on a national scale also, we do have what we call the National Task Team that seeks specifically to address hate crimes, but now the mandate has also expanded, where we look at preventative and reactionary measures to hate crimes. So that is not just documenting hate crimes in terms of violent crimes, but then also in terms of things like workplace discrimination, hate speech, whether it be on social media or whether it be in directly to a person, and addressing these things holistically. So we're in the process now of revamping our national implementing strategy for the next 5 years in South Africa. And it is much more holistic than it was back then when it was first instituted. We're looking at a lot of more involvement from an intergovernmental sector, so that justice is not the only one that drives these processes, so that we get input, for instance, from the Department of Women, Children and Disabilities, from the health sector, from housing, and what this means for LGBTI individuals. But I think definitely within our context, visibility is still key. We need political will, we need education, and those are the things that will help prevent hate crimes and discrimination in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Roche, for your wonderful insight, which is actually quite it's very similar to what is going on in Ghana and also in Uganda. Despite the legal protections that South Africa has, yes, we still do see that the situation of the LGBTIQ community and individuals does not translate practically as you have mentioned. So I will move on to question and answer. And I see two questions that have been put in the Q&A box. So the first question is for Frank. It says, hello, Dr. Mugisha, could you elaborate more on how hashtags have been useful in helping with safety and security, particularly when in response to government crackdowns? So Frank, maybe you could just unmute and respond to that question.
Well, thank you so much. So the hashtags have helped the community in terms of getting allies and partners to pay attention, but also getting other governments to reach out our own government and ask questions, what is happening to this human rights defender? And the government cannot simply ignore when there's a lot of attention around a human rights defender, especially if there's a hashtag that has gone viral. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Frank. The next question, which comes from, the next two questions, which come from Douglas Matthew. First is, how do we harness coalition to speak one voice across the board on issues affecting LGBTIQ activism? And the next question is, how have the regional activism used regional mechanisms like the African Commission to address violations? So this is open to all panelists. So maybe we can start with Roche, Wisdom, and then Frank to contribute to responding to both questions. They're in the Q&A chat box, so we can just take a look at them there. First is harnessing a coalition to speak in one voice, and the second is on tapping into and using regional mechanisms like the African Commission to address violations. So Roche?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, I know there are a lot of organizations in South Africa that engage more widely with other organizations in the global South, and that those conversations are continuously had. I would say that from my own perspective, I'm not necessarily part of those organizing teams. And so it becomes difficult to also then understand how we facilitate, viable action in each other's countries, and what take homes we can get from each other, since this communication is not consistent. So I would almost say that there's a measure of working groups that needs to exist as well within the global South, so that we tackle issues in a manner that affects us on various levels when it comes to violations, when it comes to law reform, when it comes to shelter representation and lobbying together so that we can be a united voice. And I think for me, seldomly have I been invited to these forums where these conversations take place. So if they do exist, please do invite me. I would be more happy to contribute. But I also think that it's important for us to also be allies to each other in that regard, to say when an atrocity is happening in one part of our continent, that we have a united voice. I know there is the Kumva camp that recently so many victims were found in that camp. And I know in South Africa, we had a collective campaign of organizations just raising our voice to say, this is not acceptable. We are calling on our own government to step in and to call out what is happening in that camp. And so just in terms of the AU, I think it's a similar situation. There needs to be a united front on what the voices are. But of course, with people who have more conservative legislation, it becomes difficult to get buy-in from everybody. And so it's also a question of who's representative on those bodies and how we then ask and push the agenda of human rights foremostly more than anything else.
Thank you so much, Roche. Frank or Wisdom, any of you can go next.
Well, I'll go briefly.
Okay.
On the work, how do we harness working with coalitions? I think something we've seen in Uganda, especially, is that organizations that speak up and support the LGBT community are usually labeled homosexual organizations and targeted as well with all this homophobic rhetoric, but also the shrinking civic space that we've seen generally within Uganda. So working in coalitions helps to get an informed voice, but also there is no individual target on one organization. And then very many partners will feel comfortable to come and join into the coalition. And then secondly, the response, which I mentioned earlier, having that collective response, especially to our international partners who say, how can we help? So having that collective voice of saying, as a coalition, this is how you should help. But also I believe advocacy, we believe in numbers, so we can't be ignored by our own communities here and our own governments if we are working in a bigger coalition. So, and then African Commission, I think it is very important to get the voice of the African Commission because it again removes that notion that homosexuality is foreign. If we have the African Commission speaking out on violence, like Resolution 275 on violence against the LGBT community, our own parliamentarians or politicians cannot ignore that because it's coming from Africa. Thank you.
Wisdom, you can go next.
Yes. Well, with the first question on harnessing how a coalition to speak one voice, I mean, I know this is a very big challenge, I mean, globally within the LGBTIQ movement. And I mean, various strategies have come in place to address such challenge. And so even for us in Ghana, I mean, we have realized this very big challenge. And now, as I mentioned earlier on, collectively, if you decide to come together, then there is that one organization or one person that is not affirming to whatever decisions that we are making. And so for us, as I mentioned, we are organizing, and these are some of the challenges we are facing as a movement in Ghana. And thanks to Pan-African ILGA, who has come in to, I mean, give us some form of direction and a way to go to speaking of one voice, and even how to approach a crisis when they come up, how to even approach our developing partners, our donor spaces, how we can harness all this in one room to be able to address crisis when they come up. And so, I mean, this the PI has been our support, who are stepping, I mean, physically to help us address this. As we speak currently, they are in Ghana and we are looking for way forward. We are looking at way forward in addressing this. And so that is how we are trying to harness this in the form of coalition on speaking of one voice to address these issues when they come up. And speaking of the African Commission, I think globally for us as African or regional movement, it's about time we start targeting the African Commission to start speaking against the violence that is being meted on LGBTIQ people in Africa. And that myth of is the thing of the Western. When our African leaders start speaking about these things, then they know that it is from us. It is from us. It is and a typical example is with the 21. When we were reaching out to the international community, we had the special rapporteur for the African Commission to issue a press release, which I think it's in the right direction. I mean, it's the first time I have seen them issue statement regarding LGBTIQ in a specific country. And so those are the avenues that we as African activists or movement, we should be able to push from the African perspective so that we are able to voice out our needs to our African leaders to be able to understand the advocacy in which we are in. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Wisdom. We have another question from Kwaku, and the question is for Roche. What is the relationship between the state and civil society when producing and implementing the 5-year national strategy that you were talking about? Was civil society at the table when deciding the national strategy's contents?
So just to give some context, there was a national implementing strategy, but we've come to the end of that demarcated timeline. And we've also, through then review, seen what the gaps are. And so what had happened was this was a very consultative process between civil society and then also the Department of Justice and the Secretariat. And so we analyzed things collectively from a national perspective, then also a provincial perspective, and what the needs are in the community that lies specifically in the justice cluster. And of course, as I mentioned before, it was very orientated to just hate crimes and monitoring hate crimes, but now we've become more expansive in terms of looking at preventative strategies, in terms of seeing who the key stakeholders are that can contribute in a different, meaningful way to ensure that there's a measure of equity and equality. And so we had a 2-day workshop where organizations nationally came together to give input on the previous document, to identify the gaps, to see what the asks are going forward for the next 5 years. And we are currently in the process now of, we fine-tuned the document. There was a committee selected from civil society that works with government as well to fine-tune the document and then to have it as a working document. Of course, next steps now would be to ensure that there's costing that takes place for this document as well, because otherwise it would just be one of those documents that live in theory again, but not in practicality. And so that's definitely something civil society is pushing for as well. If you are saying that this is our implementing strategy, how are we going to cost various items on this list to ensure that they are monitored, that they are evaluated, that there are reports that are done on them, that we can track the progress from what this document is supposed to look like. So there was definitely a collaborative effort, and we hope that, we always say to government, nothing about us without us. And I think they know that they can't do anything without us, because most of the time they get it wrong when they don't. So it was a very collaborative process in terms of the national implementing strategy process.
Thank you so much, Roche. We have a comment by Beverly. Beverly says that there are a number of organizations that work in the space of the African Commission. Unfortunately, the Commission itself has been very hostile to the queer community, even after the adoption of Resolution 275, which recognizes that violence against LGBTI people is a violation of human rights. And Beverly also shares a video on the commission, and I'll just put that on the chat, and we can be able to watch that at a later time when we have some time. So there being no other questions that I can see in the Q&A or in the chat box, I will ask our panelists, as we celebrate Pride, what is one message that you have for the LGBTIQ community and our allies in Africa and globally, actually? So maybe I'll start with Wisdom, Frank, and then Roche. Just 1 minute each, just a simple message.
Okay, thank you very much. To all who are listening and to all who will listen later, my message for this CS Pride is to give a sort of an encouragement and strength to our LGBTIQ individuals who are battling with themselves, with their identity and who they are. I know we have a lot of closeted LGBTIQ individuals who, for one way or the other, cannot identify and celebrate themselves in the reality of who they are. And so I send a strength to them at this moment, and that they can celebrate themselves in any way they feel, wherever they found themselves, even in their closetedness. So I send some strength to these people and to our allies and to all who are out and who are celebrating Pride openly. Let us celebrate Pride with the pride that we have in us, and let love lead. To our allies, we are asking again for more of the solidarity and the support and love that they are giving us, that we are in this together, and we still want their support, and we are doing this with them and for them. And globally, we wish everybody a happy Pride. Let us celebrate and love. Let's love lead. Thank you.
Thank you. Frank?
Thank you so much. First of all, for me, Pride has always been about visibility and also reaching out to that LGBTQ person who is out there and feeling so alone, but seeing that their voice is being amplified and being represented somewhere for that feeling. So even for now, my message would be about solidarity, togetherness, and it's also, again, like the theme for Pride, about healing, because we're in a very difficult time where our community is so traumatized, and there's a lot of mental health issues because of the pandemic, but also because of the violations that have been going on, especially in Africa. So for me, solidarity is very important for our partners to reach out to every individual LGBTQ person out there, and encourage them, support them, and give them that courage that they are not alone. So happy Pride to everyone, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Frank. Roche?
I think from my side, I'd like to say to everybody, we shall overcome. And I want this message to ring very true. We've been criminalized, decriminalized, and we have a long way to go to ensure complete safety and dignity. But I think there are definitely means that we can track our progress, that we can stand in our own selves and be proud of what we've achieved as a movement, as a political movement, and then also just as human beings, because queer people do contribute so much to society. And I'd like to say to the allies, when you see discrimination or hatred happen, if you're an ally, call out the behaviors, ensure that you normalize these conversations in your immediate circle, in your communities, so that there's a united and voice of solidarity. And then globally, I think we also just need to be cognizant that just by means of this conversation, that some countries are more progressive and privileged than others. And we need to be in a space where solidarity rings through in a much more visible way. So for me, as much as I would like to say Happy Pride Month, with all of the murders and all of the violences that have happened in South Africa recently, it's been very difficult. But I'd just like to then emphasize again that we shall overcome, and I know we will.
Thank you so much, Roche. And as we draw to a close of this panel discussion, I would like to thank the panelists for sharing with us their expertise and their insights on the situations that are ongoing in their countries. What can be done? What can we do? How can we step in? And we've heard it from them. They have highlighted the gaps that exist and what we can do as partners, as allies, to contribute to the protection of LGBTIQ community within those countries and within our own countries. So I would also like to thank all of you for taking the time to join us and participate in this discussion. So thank you all so much. I invite you all to visit our website and check out our upcoming webinars in our Out Talk series. I can just quickly post the link in the chat box, and please feel free to take a look at the webinars that are coming up. So thank you all once again. Have a lovely morning, lovely afternoon, evening, and happy Pride to you all. Thank you all so much.